So yeah, so basically today we're just going to cover the NEA tools as they exist in Go Smart, just to make sure that you're always set up in the right place when you start your cycle, so that when it's time to pull your reports, all you have to do is click that NEA report or activity locations report button on the reports tab, and you're ready to go. So we'll just move through some resources here, and stop me if you have questions, and I'll be happy to stop, or you can hold them till the end and we can always go back. All right. Okay, so first things we'll talk about, just sort of a summary, an overview of the 4 steps that it takes to really be prepared. First thing you want to do is make sure that your registration page is set up appropriately, and typically that's the kind of thing you only have to do once, right? But sometimes when we have new people coming into the system, new admin at your agencies, or maybe some other changes have occurred, not everybody always knows what to look for. So we'll talk about your registration page. Second thing is making sure that your application and your final reports are built using the appropriate templates. So we'll look at those pages. Third thing is utilizing what we call the NEA Fields widget on your Grant Manager dashboard to finalize some data, some points that might only come from you and your admin staff. And then lastly, of course, is just pulling that NEA report and that activity locations report, maybe doing a quick overview and then sending it right over to the NEA. All right, so when we talk about preparing your registration page, there's a couple things that need to be in play. All of you, if you report to the NEA, should be designated as what we call an NEA agency. So that's something, like I said, that occurs when we set you up at the very beginning. It's a setting that we can certainly change midstream, but by and large, when you come on board with us, you know if you're going to be an NEA reporter or not. So you should be set up such that your designation is NEA. What that means is that when your applicants come to register, part of your registration process will include these demographic questions by default. So you don't have to really do anything, but you do maybe want to just go back and glance after we get off this phone call, just to make sure that your registration form includes things like organization type, applicant status, discipline, and race. And again, that's because those 4 items are asked for by the NEA. Now, the second piece that you should see on your registration form that is something that you would determine is this DUNS number. So if everybody remembers, from your admin side, you have the ability to turn off or on a handful of items. This DUNS number is one of them. So you want to make sure that you physically go into your front-end manager, your customized profile, where it says DUNS information, you want to make sure this is displayed and required. That way it's going to show up to your applicants when they come into your system. Now, if you find that that was not turned on in the past, and you have folks in your system who might have registered without that being required, this might be an item that you want to ask for within the application. Because if you haven't been requesting it all this time, it's a number that won't just appear, right? So if you feel like you have folks in your system who might have missed this question for whatever reason, you do still want to collect that information somewhere. If you're not collecting it here, it's not going to get populated into that NEA report, so we can talk about ways for you to manually pull that in. But moving forward, you want to make sure that DUNS number is displayed and requested. Displayed and required. All right, and then the last thing you want to do, as I said, is you want to really just hop in here to your registration form when we get off this call and just make sure that you're seeing those items. All right, so the next big piece, obviously, is going to be preparing your application and your final report. And I feel like some of this can feel a little bit out of order, which is why I want to go over it with you guys. And I know also that many of you already have your applications and your final reports built. So this might require a little bit of going back in, seeing how things are created, and possibly modifying some things. So what you want to do is make sure that the following are in your application. Now this is, I mean the application, the peach pages, the first opportunity that your applicants see. You want to make sure that you have included an NEA questions page. So what that's going to look like, as a reminder, is that means you want within these peach pages one of these NEA questions templates. So you're going to select NEA questions, you're going to add it, and you're going to make sure it's part of your peach pages. Some of that information is demographic. Some of it is the kind of thing that might only be really known solidly after the project has occurred. That's okay. People will put in an estimate. Just as a reminder, that page is going to look like, it's going to look like this to your applicants. So again, some of this stuff they should be able to answer absolutely before they have their project in place. Some of it might be estimates, like people involved. But the biggest important reason that this needs to be on your application is that this is the only dynamic place where your applicants will be able to tell you what they're requesting. You may ask this on a custom narrative page, but if they don't enter a number here, you won't be able to capture that data in the NEA report. So that's why we suggest that you have this NEA page in your application. Another nice feature of this is that having it in the application and then repeating it again in the final report, you can pull all of this data right through. So they don't have to answer these questions again if they don't need to, but they certainly can override numbers like this that were once estimates and that by the final report will be their actual numbers. So that's a mandatory piece that you want in your application if you want to capture this amount requested number in a dynamic way. Again, like the DUNS number, if you find that you'd rather ask that on a custom narrative, that's perfectly fine, but then we'll have to go back through and sort of manually pull that in via a custom report and then place that column into the NEA report. An optional piece for the application is to add a project budget template. And I say this is optional only because the NEA report won't actually pull any data from this page at the application level, but it's never a bad idea because just like the NEA questions page, if you include a project budget template in the application and your applicants fill this out with estimates in mind, when you add it to the final report, those numbers again will follow through to the final report and they can always override and update them as needed. But you're not really asking them to do twice the work. But it is totally optional. Again, it's not something that the NEA report looks to for numbers until the final report. So at the application level, you want to make sure you've got that NEA questions page. Maybe think about adding the project budget template. Now, when we get to the final report, this is where certain things are definitely mandatory. You want to make sure to, again, repeat that NEA questions page. And as I said, all of those answers from the application will follow here. So your applicant doesn't really need to come back and answer these from scratch. They will already be answered. They also will include that estimate that they entered in the application and then give the opportunity for the actual number. And these actual numbers are what's going to appear on your NEA report, as well as all of the data that's answered in the other drop-downs. And again, this gives your applicant the opportunity to enter what they spent. And this is another dynamic field that the NEA wants to know, and this is the only place that you can really ask for it in the final report in a dynamic way. And when I say dynamic, I mean in a way that the NEA report is speaking to these fields. If you create an amount spent field on a custom narrative page, you'll absolutely gather that data, but the NEA report doesn't know to go look for it, right, if it's on a custom narrative. It only knows to look for it here. So that's why you want to make sure you have that NEA questions page in both the application and the final report. Now, at the final report level, it is mandatory to include that project budget page, again, if you want the NEA report to dynamically grab your totals of expenses, in-kind, and income. Again, if you've got your own budget table going and you're happy with it, great. Just means we need to pull that into a custom report and then manually move it into the NEA report. But again, like the NEA page, if I've answered these questions on a template, on the project budget template in the application, those numbers will appear here at the final report level, and I can just override them if they've been updated now that I've actually held my project. So those two are mandatory. The third page you want to think about adding to your final report is going to be that activity locations template. And I only say this is optional if you find that there's another way that you like to gather this information. But again, we have an activity locations report already dynamically speaking to this page. So if you include this page in your final report, all you have to do is go to your Reports tab, click Activity Locations Report, and you're ready to go. So I would definitely recommend that you use this template other than creating your own template. So just as a reminder, this is going to look like a blank form. Your applicants will fill this out once. When they click Save Work, their venue will be created as a dynamic link at the top, and then this form will disappear, and they'll be able to keep entering new data into it, to keep adding locations. All right, any questions on the pages that should be in your applications and your final reports? And let me clarify, I did sort of skip over. Most of your applications, by and large, will of course include other pages, right? You want to include your custom narrative pages where you're asking your other questions. Maybe you have some support material pages. This is just an example of what's necessary for the NEA page report, but your cycles will of course include other pages. Great. All right, the third big piece that we want to bring some attention to is this NEA Fields widget on your Grant Manager dashboard. So once you have folks in the system and they are in received and probably funded, because at that point you've already gone through your panel process, you've already decided who's funded, you're going to come in, you're going to change them to funded. This gives you the opportunity to say how much they're being awarded, and that of course comes from you and your admin. But beyond just changing them to funded, you want to use this NEA Fields to finish up any data that wasn't pulled in through the application and the final report. So again, the applicant entered 12345 on their NEA page in the application. You entered 10,000 when you changed their status to funded. They entered 9,876 when they filled out the NEA page in the final report. These estimates come from your project budget in the application. Then these 4 fields would be blank until you come in as the admin and enter these numbers, because these will come from you, possibly your committee as well. You're going to enter what the NEA is kicking in. You're going to enter what you kick in. You'd enter if there's any other additional funding coming from somewhere else. And then if you have any kind of unique identifier, you would enter it here. These actual numbers of people engaged comes from the NEA page in the final report. And then these actual budget numbers come from the project budget template in the final report. There is a different way you can do this. We like to make this NEA Fields widget available for each applicant. Obviously, you can click this for each person going down the row. But if it's easier for you to skip the step of going into the NEA Fields and rather creating that NEA report, pulling that Excel spreadsheet, and then going through your spreadsheet and entering those fields like the share fields or the identifier, we have some clients who do that as well. So it's totally up to you, whichever is more convenient. This just gives you the opportunity to do it before you build that report, and then you know when you pull that report into Excel, it's just ready to go. And I'll show you in a minute what I mean when I say pull it in manually versus entering it there. So let's talk about what it looks like to pull that report. You'll head to your Reports tab. If you use that activity locations page in your final report, you want to pull that in its own report by going to Locations Report. Like always, you'll select your program and cycle. You'll select your statuses, usually final report received folks, and then you'll build that report. And then that will give you an Excel spreadsheet of all of your applicants and all of their entered locations. That can go straight to the NEA. The NEA report, you're going to pull the same way, select your program and cycle, select your status or statuses, you'll build your report. You'll most likely download it to Excel, and what's going to happen is you're going to receive the report in exactly the format that the NEA has requested it. So we've updated this so that it includes exactly and only what they ask for with the appropriate labels. And the reason that I want to point that out is that that is why we really want you to use our tools, so that you have to do as little work as possible on the back end to give the NEA exactly what they're looking for. So this example only has my one applicant who's in final report received, but you'll note that we've got all of our headers exactly the way the NEA is looking for them. We've got all of our data coded exactly the way the NEA is looking for it. Even though your applicants will see English words when they're answering these questions, you and the NEA will see the codes that they're looking for. Now, when we talked about using that NEA Fields widget to complete some of those SAA and NEA and other share questions, if you opt not to use that NEA Fields widget from the Grant Manager dashboard, these 4 fields at the end of your report will be blank, and that's perfectly fine if you intend rather to come into here, go through your own notes, and enter these numbers right here in the spreadsheet. So either way is of course fine. This isn't going to the NEA until you review it and send it to them, but that would be my recommendation, is doing one of those 2 things, either using the NEA Fields widget or coming in here and adding all that data here manually. Other times throughout this process, when I was saying you could also pull that stuff in manually if you're not asking it through a dynamic field, I meant pretty much the same thing. So let's say that you don't include an NEA page in your application, but you've asked for the grant amount requested on a custom narrative page. You would pull a custom report that includes the page where you asked that question, and then you would pull that column right into here, because this would be blank if you did not include an NEA page in your application. All right. Same thing for the DUNS number. If you find that you have people who might have registered when you weren't requiring that, you'd also have to pull that DUNS number in a separate custom report and then pull it into here. But if you've set up everything the way that we've talked about here with these 4 steps, all you should have to do at the end is pull this NEA report, review it, and it's ready to go. Alrighty, so as promised, that was a bit of a shorter one. I know it's a lot of heady things. For sure, let me know if you want to see anything in action, if you want me to walk through adding pages, building custom reports. Any questions right now?
That's
all right,
clear.
Great. Oh, super. Awesome. Well, as always, you can reach out to me at my email if you have any questions following up to this. There's also a little guide that's available that basically just walks through the steps we just talked about. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.